Guys, I am super stoked to have Stephen Morrison on the pod today. He's the head of engineering at AllieHealth. They're a startup that's been going for about 2 years now. He shares some super tactical wisdom in finding offshore developers. He also shares some insight if you are an offshore developer, how to maximize your value. And we also touch on some of the things that make a great CTO. It was super great to have him on, and I hope you guys enjoy the episode.
Cool, man. Cool. Well, first of all, Stephen Morrison, thank you for joining. What are you glad about in life?
Glad about in life. As in like right now or
yeah. What's got you happy? What's got you glad?
happy? I think I've been actually like really this is really random, but I don't know if you followed this. Like OpenAI is like 12 days of ship miss.
Yeah.
It has made me really stoked. And I think it's a brilliant marketing trick. But anyway, just a random thing that has gotten me really like.
Dude, I saw like the first drop or two maybe, but which one are you excited about?
Oh, well, first of all, I can't imagine being an engineer on those teams. They're literally like 12 days of straight like ship everything you built this year.
Yeah.
And it's like Christmas next week, like hopefully everything's still working. Anyway, just the like momentum, I think there's just like a lot of, I mean, even I was looking at doing a project around audio recently, and like they just dropped the prices on their real-time API, like 60%, just like boom, whatever. Which is just like nuts.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's just like the rate at which things are just like increasing dramatically is like, before it was like, okay, this is a cool play toy. And then it's like, and I think it's finally to the place where it's really, I mean, even just like in my day-to-day, I've been using Cursor. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
IDE. Like,
I haven't tried it yet.
It's so good. I like last night I was just like refactoring things. I was like, hey, let me just tell Cursor to do it. I didn't even edit the code at all, which is like, this is the right code.
Dang.
Whatever. Anyway, I think people say a lot of things about it, like, as far as like, oh, it's going to replace people and whatever. Not that. I think the thing that hit me the other day is it's kind of like, it's like the dishwasher for like knowledge workers for all intents and purposes. Like sometimes like you won't, it's better just wash those dishes yourself, but like,
yeah,
it's pretty helpful.
Did you come up with that analogy?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I love it. Oh, super cool. I gotta, Cursor's been on my list. I haven't, tried it yet because I'm too attached to like all my things in VS Code, and I'm afraid of like losing them all if I go to a new thing.
You won't. It's straight up VS Code. Like you just import your VS Code settings and it's a thing.
Okay. I'll have to check it out. Good to know. See, I didn't even know. Too easy. I'm missing out. Okay, cool. Molly, yeah. Tell me, what are you up to? Where do you work? What do you do for them? Just give me a little synopsis of what you're doing.
Yeah. So I'm head of engineering at AllieHealth. It's a age tech seed stage startup that's building vertical SaaS for senior living communities.
Vertical SaaS. What does vertical SaaS mean?
Yeah, vertical SaaS is like you come in with like a product, and then your ultimate goal is like you want to basically build the custom built. It's like the new term for ERPs for all intents and purposes. Kind of like you come in with one product, and then like eventually you build a whole suite of products that like now you're their operating system for all intents and purposes. So like in a vertical. So like, okay, in senior living, for example, I'm building like a scheduling tool for like scheduling staff. Like there's a million staff scheduling tools, but they're like purpose built for senior living, not anybody else. So It's like a lot of the trade-offs are different.
Do you think the industry, actually I think about this a lot with kind of AI as well, but it seems like you sort of come out with this like generalized LLM like ChatGPT, which takes the market by storm. But it seems like over time, everything tends to get specialized anyways, because like the one size fits all only doesn't fit everybody. So do you see a trend where there's more and more opportunity just in the general software market for things like vertical SaaS, where there's 100 CRMs out there, but eventually you get big enough or you get specific enough and you really should be building your own custom?
Yeah, I mean, that's in the VC world, that's where a ton of the money outside of AI is going, is vertical SaaS, because it's like we've got all these general solutions, but like, okay, if a company can come in and basically like dominate this market, like they can also be $1 billion company, even though it's not like an enormous market.
Gotcha. When you say that's where all the VC money's going, where do you, like, again, I'm thinking of like the SMB owner, right? Who doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily know the tech world, but they're going to need funding at some point. Like where do you
Yeah.
find those numbers? Who do you listen to kind of like get in tune with that world?
Yeah, I'm pretty in tune with it as far as like LinkedIn goes, as far as, I mean, there's different podcasts that are more in tune with that, more like tech focused, but also just like, yeah, I think a lot of my sources have been internal as far as like, okay, we're working with this VC, and then like this VC is more focused this way, and this is what they're saying in these conferences, that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes me think. I bet you could find. Well, yeah. If you have any good podcasts, maybe share those with me or something, and I can include those on any LinkedIn stuff that we do that might be helpful for people. It's. I mean, he is a. I guess I don't know if he's a VC per se, but I listen to the Tech Meme Ride Home. You ever listen to that podcast?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've never listened to it.
I like it because it's like 15 minutes. It's literally like the drive home or like the drive to, my local coffee date or whatever. And I can get just a very quick pulse on, I mean, he basically goes through and summarizes all the hot topics of the day. So it's just kind of, I mean, and like, half the time I might not know what he's talking about, but at least I'm getting some exposure to, what the market's saying.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I think you listened to Lenny's podcast. I don't think it's not super heavy VC focused, but very like product early stage company focused.
Yeah.
There's also, what's that one? The All In podcast.
Yeah.
Which is like very venture focused. Those kind of ones.
Okay. Yeah. All in I have yet to listen to, but I've heard it many places. I need to go check that one out. Okay. So then as you guys were, well, how long have you been working with this startup?
Almost 2 years now.
Almost 2 years. And you guys have used offshore teams in your building.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I know you've used offshore teams actually before that as well at previous companies. So what's the worst experience that you had with an offshore team, and how did you resolve it?
Yeah. So I think, I think there's like, I probably had worse experiences than this one, but I think the thing I think I've seen it on various levels. I've seen it just purely as like, okay, go to like an offshore contracting company, give me like 5 devs and whatever, to where I am now, where we've like hired people directly and are paying them directly, stuff like that. I think there's a whole spectrum of how you do it. I would say one of the experiences I had that was very informative was an engineer who came on. Good engineer. He actually came as a recommendation from another engineer I had, and was writing pretty decent code. But whenever we were like in conversations, he was always kind of, it was always unclear how much he was getting, if it was actually like resulted, like ultimately he was doing a project and he needed to understand it and push back, and like he was owning the architecture of it or whatever, and help drive those things. And it was like, we would be in these like hour-long conversations, and like he didn't speak a word, and like I'm not sure how much he got, whatever.
So were these conversations like sorry, were these directed at him, or was this like was it kind of between two people?
Group.
Okay,
it was like there's like a couple people, and he was one of the couple people, but it was like frequently about like a project he was working on or whatever else where he should be pretty involved, and he had a lot of experience, so it wasn't like he was like a junior engineer who was just kind of like soaking in,
right?
Whatever. Anyway, ended up deciding not to, like, it just wasn't working out, and we mutually agreed it's time to leave, whatever. What I came to discover was that it's pretty common for these offshore folks to be working 3-4 jobs simultaneously, and ultimately what's going on under the hood is like he's multitasking. He's got 4 Slacks open, trying to work across all these different companies.
It's crazy.
Anyway, so that's I think it was just very informative to like the output and is clearly different.
This wasn't a small. I imagine people think like, oh well, if you go with an untrusted source, a small shop that hasn't been validated, you might get that. I mean, I think this was sizable.
This is across the board.
This is a sizable company, right?
No. This is a huge offshore, offshore like contracting company that just works with a bunch of people.
How did you find that out? Like, I'm imagining.
Yeah.
I'm imagining the company was not necessarily forthcoming about like, hey, he spread across 5 projects.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it was through a friend who was themselves doing that, who I didn't work with anymore, who was like, "Hey, just so you know, I don't want to. I don't want to work for you because I don't want to do this to you. This is the situation."
Okay, so it was a friend of yours who was also at an offshore company
Who had
or
worked? Yeah, who had worked for me previously.
worked for you previously.
And he like I had been getting advice for him from him on like offshoring and like people to
Okay.
hire and stuff
Okay,
like that.
so you had reached out sort of separately, not in relation to the company that you were working with, but separately.
Yeah.
You're saying, "Hey, I'm working on a separate project, whatever, looking for offshore resources.
Yeah,
Are you available? Do you know anybody?"
he didn't work for me anymore.
Yeah,
And so then he was free to like tell me what the situation was.
he was free to be honest with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, what's going on there? Okay,
But
so
I mean, from the standpoint of like their perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Ultimately, they're getting paid peanuts to some degree, and they're just kind of being tossed tickets over the wall for all intents and purposes, because like that's how U.S. companies have kind of figured like, okay, this is the way to do it. Like we just like throw them things over the wall, they'll get them done eventually, whatever. So what he found was like he started working one company, and what he was like so little work, he would just like nap all day between tasks, and then he was like, hey, what if I just like go get another job? How about a couple more? Whatever. Anyway, so it's like it's a self-propagating problem, because then they're like, these engineers are good, but they're not actually producing a crazy amount of work because they're doing a bunch of things. So then the companies don't improve things or anything, and they're just kind of like, okay, well, whatever. So they just have to keep doing that.
is there again, is there a way to hedge against? I mean, it was like if you're an engineer at a big company, you know, your boss's boss is probably making those decisions, and there's not a lot you can do other than make the most of the cards that you're dealt. But being in your position now where you can make that choice, how do you is there a way you can like head that off from the beginning and let them know like, we're not a ticket shop. I'm not going to just be sending you random tasks. It's like, I want you, because I assume that you want you want that team culture, right? You want them embedded. You want them, high communication, high transparency. How do you still leverage that offshore team, but still, I don't know, like, is it reasonable for us to expect that culture?
Yeah. I have found it's very reasonable. You have to find the right people, obviously, and I think like ultimately you can't just be like, hey, are you working multiple jobs? Like, of course I'm never gonna tell you that. But what I found is like, as you make the culture very clear that like ultimately like you're looking for someone who's gonna own the product, and like who's going to like get deep in the business side of things and whatever. Like, these engineers want that. They just aren't given that. And so when they have that opportunity, they're like, oh yeah, this would be great. Like this is worth potentially even a pay cut to some degree, to be able to like have this focus and like have this thing that like we can like build this team, build this company, build this product.
They get that ownership and that autonomy that they're missing, which as we in I don't know, Western culture, we seem to kind of take that part for granted now, that like that's how we get our meaning and everything, but maybe that's not as popular of thinking in other cultures.
Well, I think it's a trade-off that they've made, because U.S. company, like the alternative is like they work for a local company where they make like nothing and they work like crazy. So they're like, okay, I need to make more money and work less hours. So I'll take whatever the U.S. companies want me to do, and like I'll sacrifice this ownership side of things because like
okay,
I got to at some point.
So maybe it's more about kind of gaming the system than it is about even culture. It's like they know that there's a system with the larger companies that they can work to their benefit financially.
Yeah.
And so those financial incentives are driving a lot of that.
Yeah.
But at the individual level, like you're saying, there's kind of these intangible incentives about the product ownership and the autonomy that can win out in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And I would just say to me, the sweet spot is like, if you can give them a decent amount more than they would make locally, but with that ownership, like it's going to be less than if they were working 4 jobs, but they have that ownership, and it's usually works out. And if there's the clear
Yeah,
like career growth and whatever, and even just like, okay, like as you grow, you're going to be making more money because of the company succeeding, whatever else.
right.
They're ready for that.
Okay, that's a really good point. Let's talk about that for a second because that, I mean, that's a huge question on a lot of people's minds is like, how much is this really going to cost? What should I expect? Because you see, I mean, you see stuff all over the internet from like, Fiverr, right? Like $5 for
Yeah.
things up to when I worked at a larger company, I think we were paying anywhere from 70 to $80 an hour for South American developers.
Yeah.
So like how do you sort of what price do you expect to pay? How do you hone that into, like you're saying, kind of the local economy of whether it's South
Yeah.
America or Eastern, whatever?
Yeah. So I would say like, okay, that like 70, $80 an hour situation. One other factor here is like when you're working through agencies, which is like usually what you got to start at least, they're taking like 50%. Usually. Anyway, so the like what the people are making themselves is like half of that usually. So like if you can pay what you're paying the agency to people directly, like that's a dream job for them. But even yeah, so and then like they're not working like 2 jobs. They got 1 job and like if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
I forget what I put a tangent there. What was your original question again?
Well, no, I think you started to answer because I'm sort of like, what should a founder or a CTO who's looking at an offshore team, looking at offshore people, what should they expect to pay? And I think you're saying even though the 70 to $80 might be higher than what would be listed, because some places in South America I've seen as low as like 20 to $40 an
Yeah.
hour, like super like ridiculously low. But you're kind of saying like, look, if you find the right people, it's kind of worth paying them, you know,
Yeah.
something around, I don't know if would you say as high as 70 to 80, 60 to 70?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you can pay less than that. It really depends on the local dynamics. So like
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing South America, if you're doing India, if you're doing Ukraine, like there's a lot of different pieces there. I think the more you can find out, like for example, like looking at the local, like okay, I don't know, like Jamaica or something. Look at like what's the average salary people are taking home, and like frequently look at like the tax rate. Like what's the max tax bracket?
Mm.
Because like if you're paying like above the max tax bracket, you're probably in a pretty good place.
Mm.
The other factor is like, okay, look at what the local like tech companies are paying. And that's also a helpful factor. Like you want to be higher than them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can do less than like a US salary, that kind of thing.
Nice. I actually have to, I know like, what Indeed has a specific job board for Mexico. Would you actually just go to like company websites, just do some research on like engineering companies in Mexico, let's say, go to their websites and just look at
Yeah.
their job postings? Or is there something better like Glassdoor that you can just go like give me the stats on this region?
Yeah, I haven't found anything like that where it's like a very clear. It's mostly been through like talking to people. I think, yeah, I don't have a good answer for like the like perfect place. I think like Indeed, that's probably not a bad place. Even like LinkedIn to some degree.
Mm.
If you're looking at that geography, you could probably get some sense there. You can also like the big companies like Uber and Google and whatever are generally paying pretty close to like local rates. So like they're general like you can generally get a sense from them because they're usually more standardized as far as like showing salaries places and stuff like that.
Gotcha. So you're saying go to like the Google website and find jobs that they've posted in those regions?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Nice. Yeah, smart. So I guess on the other side of that, I mean, and I do think like that story, I kind of hear that more and more about US based folks finding out that their offshore folks are working multiple jobs and, that loses a lot of trust for the US based folks and they end up usually cutting those people off pretty quickly
Yeah.
and separating from them. So, and I know a lot of people actually in one of my business networks that I'm in, there's a lot of people from India and other places that have reached out to me to network over the software stuff. So I'm thinking about, if any of them are watching this, and we're kind of talking about some of these differences and expectations and stuff, like what can they be doing to really make themselves, because it would be nice, actually, right? It would be nice to be able to go to one of these companies that's local and taking care of all the logistics of finding and hiring local good people. And for guys like you and I not have to do all this legwork to go like research, how do I, where do I find somebody who I can kind of depend on and match expectations? So what advice would you give them?
I would say,
go ahead.
To touch on that point super quickly,
Yes.
I think it's helpful. I think if you can find good local recruiters who are just recruiting for local companies who are interested in working with US companies, but aren't like actively working with them, that can be a really good mix. It can be tricky to keep them because like they might eventually find like a US company that is willing to like pay them a bunch to do it or whatever. But like that, they can usually bridge the gap really well.
Okay. When you say a local recruiter, is that like an agency or an individual?
So there are agencies that just recruit inside the companies or inside the countries, and like sometimes they're willing to go outside. But what I found is actually like even like someone at one of those places who is like ready to do a side thing for you, whatever, can work pretty well.
And I guess that's where LinkedIn comes in really handy, because you can find the company, go look at the individuals that work there, reach out to the individuals, see if they're willing to help you find some local resources.
Yeah.
Perfect. Actually, I really want to, can we crack that open as well a little bit? Like, are you paying them, are you giving them just like a 10% finder's fee? Like, how do you typically work that deal out?
What I've been able to do is actually like an hourly or flat fee kind of situation. I've actually been able to avoid the like 10% finder's fee or whatever. Or like, I mean, some of these places, they're kind of crazy.
Some of these places are crazy. They're like 25% or something of like the first year salary, right?
Exactly. So it's a little tricky. I mean, it was, the approach I took was just like, okay, reach out to a bunch of recruiters in the country on LinkedIn, and then I found one. They connected me to another one that does this kind of stuff.
Nice. So you only okay, good. You make it sound easy.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's not straightforward, but it is like, I think it's easier than it sounds from the outside.
Sure.
Or it's definitely possible. Or like.
Yeah. Right. No, that's super helpful.
I also, the other thing I would say is like I found a decent amount of success with even just like posting a LinkedIn job posting in the country and like making it just very clear. Like, obviously you then have to do a lot of vetting of candidates and whatever, and reading resumes, whatever. I would say something that I found, these people are generally willing to do a lot of work to get into a company that they want to get into. So I know in the US, doing like a technical assessment or like a take home assignment or whatever that they have to do usually is like a huge barrier to entry.
Yeah.
But it's what I found is really helpful in that situation where like you don't even really have to like review the resumes. You just say like, here's this thing. It takes you like 3 hours. The ones that are actually going to be anything good are going to do it because they want that kind of position, and it gives you a lot of signal pretty fast. Obviously, in the situation where you're not technical, you need help putting that together or whatever. But that frequently is a very good screen. That's what I found.
That, I mean, I feel like,
and there's a lot of people that are willing to do that because they want to work for a U.S. company.
I actually feel like that's a whole nother episode we could sit down and do, is kind of talk about like the technical assessments. And I mean, there's a lot of tools now that kind of help with that. I think. There's probably I'm going to resist the temptation to dive into that. There was one other thing that I wanted to ask you about as far as payment. So I use Gusto, and Gusto supports 200 companies or 200 countries, something like that. Is that it's essentially the international 1099, and just use Gusto to manage payments and all that?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of different options out there. I don't know if you've heard of Deal.
I have not.
They kind of popularized the like, basically you can pay anybody in any country and we'll take care of all the logistics. They have like local companies. They do the taxes, everything. I would say like they have a pretty decent margin that you have to pay, there. So like we've avoided them to some degree, depending on how you do it. Like if I was recruiting in multiple countries, I would definitely go with them because then I'd have to be dealing with all the logistics of different ones. I've focused like one country, so I just know exactly how that country works and how the
Okay.
pieces work, and it generally works pretty well. Rippling, I think probably Gusto is going the same direction, whatever, are building those things internally too. So like,
Yeah.
they're all trying to compete with deals. So
Yeah. 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 I had no problem with Gusto. Because I ended up having somebody in Canada and Spain. I mean, Canada's pretty easy, but Spain I was like iffy about, but it seems like they're taking care of everything. So
I've also found that like a number of these countries, it's very common for engineers to basically have their own company that you can pay. So they take care of the taxes and whatever. It's just kind of pretty common as long as you put it on the job rec that like, hey, you need to have a company to pay. So you're gonna have to like go through like some of that like work or whatever.
Okay.
But they're willing to do it to be able to be like they're getting paid in US dollars. Like that's a pretty good deal.
Right.
Whatever.
Right. Okay. Very cool. Okay. So then I think trying to rewind back to, there's too many things I want to talk about. I guess back to like, what advice would you give those companies or individuals who are looking to, utilize the international market, work for US based companies, but hopefully not in a way that gets them cut off at some point.
Yeah. I think the more you're like, you're going to differentiate yourself if you're not just happy with like, throw me tickets over the wall and I'll do them. Like, don't just do a ticket. Like, own it. Like, try to get more ownership. Like, the more you show that you're ready to own things, like, they want that. It's just like frequently these engineers aren't doing that. I'd also say like I think frequently these outsource like offshore engineers generally call themselves developers, and this is like very pedantic to some degree. But like what I found is like that, like, oh, I'm a developer, frequently kind of create this tendency of like this feeling of like, oh yeah, I write code, which is true. But like when you talk about yourself, like, oh, I'm an engineer, I'm a software engineer, whatever.
Yeah.
It just like it changes the narrative, and even for yourself, like, oh, like that means I need to own the architecture. I need to like deliver for the business, and not just like write some whatever code you tell me to write.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's cliche to say like words are important and words matter, and yet it feels like it hits home to me like once a year something happens and I'm like, yeah, like it really does. If you wake up every morning and you call yourself, a developer or a coder even,
Yeah.
then you're stuck coding all the time, and like that's your thing that you go to work with. But you wake up in the morning and you're like, I'm a software engineer, right? It's like my spectrum of things, like I solve problems, right? I don't write code, I solve problems. And that mind shift is like you're saying, you carry that into every ticket you get, every meeting you go into. I think it does help to change your perspective. And it's like, be your own psychologist and, change your perspective incrementally with stuff like that. Love it. Let's see. I want to go to thinking about our founders, our non-technical, medium-sized, SMBs, small to medium-sized business owners. They're looking for somebody like you. They're looking for a CTO who can kind of do all the things with, like if you have to write the code, if you have to manage the team, if you have to give me an estimate on budgets, right? Like how much am I going to be spending for the next proof of concept or MVP or whatever it might be. So how should they go about finding a good CTO? What should they be looking for?
Yeah. I would say look for people who are ultimately you're going to need like, so if you're looking for just like a person to write code, that's going to be, I'm assuming that that's not the situation. It's going to be more like a person who will like have some sort of team. Like it's not just them. Is that correct?
Well, you tell me, should they be looking for a person who just writes code? And that's kind of maybe they don't consider that person a CTO, but they consider that person kind of their first business partner in this idea that they have.
Yeah. So my general recommendation would be bring on someone who is ready to write code and like nothing is beneath them for all intents and purposes, but also has experience like building a team and like seeing products evolve and whatever, so that they can lay a good foundation. It's easy to bring on, like, as your first engineer, it's like, okay, let's bring on someone who's like decently cheap, like maybe they're in the US, decently cheap for the US, whatever, and like they can write code. Like, I just need code written pretty quickly to get this out the door or whatever. But frequently that's gonna like bite them later on, when it's like, oh, now we have customers and like it needs to be stable, and there's just, it's kind of a mess. So you need someone who can write code decently, but then also they're able to manage a team to some degree. Like, they've got some experience having done that, so that once it's time we're expanding, like we need to grow, like that's not outside their wheelhouse. And nowadays there's definitely a resurgence of like, hey, engineering managers shouldn't just manage, like that middle management. I think there's,
dude, there's way too many of these engineering managers who like half of them hadn't done a technical thing in like 10 years.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, like, Musk has popularized it. A lot of like that. A lot of companies have gone that direction a lot, which like has improved it to some degree, I think. But you don't need someone. You don't need someone who's like an agile expert and like that's useless. You need someone who can take the business value, who can write lots of code, but isn't afraid of not writing code and managing it.
I think one thing that you're touching on there too is just that you made me think of is that person having a strong sense of sort of what is a proof of concept versus an MVP, at least from a technical level, and has a kind of a strong sense of like, when do we scale? How do like I guess even they don't even necessarily need to know how to scale. I think sometimes it's more valuable to really know when to scale, meaning they can write that first crappy code and kind of understand like, this is going to work great for the first 100,000 users because they're all beta testers or whatever. And it's not until we get to some threshold that then we need to go hire more people or even more senior people who can really get into the weeds of like more technical performance optimizations or whatever needs to happen.
Yep. And I think you need someone who has seen, who, like, for example, I think a very common thing is when you're first starting out, once your code grows, you need quite a good amount of testing around it to make sure that it's not breaking all the time.
Yeah.
But engineers can kind of get in this mindset where code isn't good if I haven't written lots of tests around it yet. And so when they come to the like early stage company stage, they're like, okay, I got to write lots of tests. And like, it's like, this code is potentially going to be garbage in 2 months because nobody wants it. And the critical thing is the business. Like, you got to get those people to buy the code before any tests matter at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's them having the maturity to know that like testing is good and something that will be needed down the road, but to be able to balance the like, now we're at the point where we should be doing more of this kind of testing. We should be increasing this, and like maybe this part of the code base like doesn't have tests still because it doesn't have that many customers, and it's like we have the right manual processes in place. And just having that maturity to be able to balance the business priorities with the what is good code. Because good code is only as good as it does for the business.
I think that is such great advice. I think a lot of engineers need to hear that. And that's one of the things that I wanted to address that I think we don't have time for is like what interview questions to ask CTOs. I actually think that's a really good one because, just kind of asking them like, hey, what's your test policy for, as I have this new idea that is totally unvalidated, right? And you probably don't want to lead the witness too much, so be careful with this question. But, your mindset as a founder should be, I haven't fully validated my market. I don't have any users who have tested this. There's going to be a lot of learnings. I'm going to plan to pivot a couple times before this is all said and done. With all that in mind, asking a potential CTO like, hey, how are you going to approach testing with this? I would almost, I don't know what your answer would be real quick, but I would almost go so far as to say like, basically no, like don't even plan on tests for the first year, maybe even 2 years, because you're still learning so much even 2 years into it. And that's going to vary on, your accuracy, but you're going to only figure out that accuracy, like you said, as you bring users in, as you have users who are willing to pay. That's when you really start to understand where the value is. How would you answer that?
Yeah. And I think it's such a business, like a conversation about the business. Like, what's your threshold of error as far as like the customers? Like, are these customers going to be like, oh, there's this bug, like this is garbage? Or like some industries, like, okay, if you're dealing with like finance or something,
Right.
and like you get something, you mess up the numbers, like that could be like totally kill you. Whereas like other things, like this UI element is a different place than it should be, or like this one is broken, it's probably fine. And the willingness of the founder to be like, we can, because frequently you can kind of like put operations in the gap, as far as like, hey, our code might break sometimes a little bit more often than you like, but we're going to be like, they're emailing you, talking to you, helping you through the problem, communicating with you, whatever. And frequently that is like, that's much cheaper than the amount of work it would take to get to that level.
Dollar for dollar. Yeah, that's way cheaper. Good point.
Whereas then as you scale, it's like, okay, like now it isn't cheap because we have to have so many operations to make this happen.
Right. Well, and then people are always afraid of their branding, but like your branding and your reputation, I think as long as you do a good job working with your early customers, those are not on the line until you've started to get customers who like don't even know you. Until people are signing up cold online or whatever, like that's when that reputation starts to matter a lot more.
Yeah, you are the brand for your first, like,
the founder.
Yeah, the founder is the brand, and like you need to make it that. Like they're buying like your like insights and like your view of the market and like your vision for like the first 10 customers at least.
Such a good point. They're buying your vision, not your software in the beginning. Like, yes, the software's there. It's intended to fill that gap, but it's really the vision. Oh, I love that.
Awesome. You're not filling the gap fully yet, but you're going there, and like they're buying, like, you don't have a reputation for good. Like you can't tell them like, go talk to these 20 different customers because like you don't have them yet.
I love it. Dude, thanks so much for the time. But one last thing, how can people stay in touch with you? Like, what's the website of the product you're working on? What's your site? Like, if they want more Stephen Morrison, where are they going?
Yeah, the product is AllieHealth.com, and find me on LinkedIn.
You're gonna get a surge of 1,000 followers. So
yeah, I know.
Awesome. All right, man. Thanks so much for your time.
Let's go.
See you later.
Thanks.